Judge laughs at homeless grandmother in court, but has no idea who's about Tolkien. The Westfield County Courthouse stood imposingly against the winter sky, its red brick exterior darkened by the morning's freezing rain. Inside Courtroom 5, the harsh fluorescent lighting cast unflattering shadows across the worn wooden benches and faded carpet. A setting that had witnessed thousands of lives altered by the bang of a gavel. Eleanor Jenkins sat alone at the defendant's table, her 72-year-old frame seeming to shrink beneath the weight of the moment. Her hand, spotted with age and swollen from arthritis, clutched a plastic shopping bag containing every document she owned in the world. She wore her Sunday best, a faded blue dress she carefully hand-washed in Ashleta bathroom sink the night before, and a threadbare cardigan that had once been her late husband's. Her silver hair was neatly pinned back, dignity being the one possession she refused to surrender. 6 months ago, Eleanor had been living in the modest home she and her late husband Robert had purchased 43 years earlier. Then came Robert's prolonged illness, the medical bills that devoured their savings, and finally the foreclosure she couldn't fight while caring for her dying spouse. After Robert's passing, she'd lived briefly with her granddaughter, Jessica, until Jessica's husband lost his job, and their 2-bedroom apartment couldn't accommodate an extra person. Now Eleanor divided her nights between a crowded women's shelter and, when the shelter was full, the backseat of her 20-year-old Bic, the last possession she had managed to keep. Today's hearing concerned a trespassing charge. Eleanor had been found sleeping in the lobby of Park View Towers, an upscale apartment building where she had once worked as a cleaner. On a particularly cold night, when the shelter was full, she had slipped inside, hoping to stay warm until morning. In the building's plush lobby, the security guard who found her had recognized her, but the building's new management company insisted on pressing charges to discourage vagrants. As their attorney had put it, Judge Raymond Hargrove entered the courtroom with the brisk efficiency of a man determined to clear his docket before lunch. At 58, he had a reputation throughout the district for his impatience with what he called nuisance cases and his particular disdain for defendants who appeared without legal representation. Case number 7293, City of Westfield vs. Eleanor Jenkins, criminal trespassing, the bailiff announced. Judge Hargrove glanced at the file, then at Eleanor, not bothering to hide his annoyance at seeing an elderly woman without counsel. Another delay in his carefully scheduled day. "M. Jenkins, do you have an attorney today?" he asked, though the answer was obvious. Eleanor stood shakily, her arthritic knees protesting the movement. "No, Your Honor, I couldn't afford one, but I'd like to explain what happened if I may. The court has appointed public defenders for this very purpose, Ms. Jenkins," Hargrove said with a sigh. "Do you wish to request one now?" "It will mean rescheduling this hearing." Eleanor hesitated. Another court date meant another day of figuring out bus fare, another day away from her job search. No, Your Honor. I'd prefer to resolve this today if possible. The judge nodded curtly. "Very well. How do you plead to the charge of criminal trespassing?" "I suppose I'm guilty in the technical sense, Your Honor. I was seen the building without permission, but I worked there for 15 years, and it was below freezing that night, and the shelter was Ms. Jenkins." The judge interrupted. "This court is concerned with facts, not circumstances. You've admitted to the trespassing. The standard fine is $250 plus court costs or community service if you're unable to pay." Eleanor's face fell. "Your Honor, I don't have $250. I'm currently between homes and looking for work. As for community service, I'd be happy to do it, but I'm also caring for my great-grandson 3 days a week while my granddaughter works." And Judge Hargrove's dismissive chuckle cut through the courtroom, silencing Eleanor mid-sentence. "Ms. Jenkins, everyone who comes before this court has a story. Everyone has circumstances, but the law doesn't operate on sob stories about homelessness or babysitting duties." A murmur of discomfort rippled through the courtroom. The prosecutor, a young woman who had been checking her phone, looked up with a frown. "I understand, Your Honor," Eleanor said, her voice soft but dignified. "I'm not asking for special treatment. I'm simply explaining my situation so you can understand why I was there that night and why I'm limited in how I can make amends." The judge leaned forward, his patience visibly thinning. "Ms. Jenkins, let me be clear, this court sees dozens of homeless individuals each month. Many have mental health issues, addiction problems, or criminal histories that explain their situation. What's your excuse? You appear coherent and well-groomed. You have family in the area. Why exactly should this court believe you couldn't find a better solution than breaking into private property?" Elena stood straighter, her dignity intact, despite the judge's condescension. "I didn't break in, Your Honor. The door was unlocked for a food delivery, and I didn't damage anything or disturb anyone. I simply sat in the lobby until morning when I left to catch the bus to my part-time job at the diner. A job that apparently doesn't pay enough for you to secure housing," the judge remarked with a smirk. Perhaps better life choices earlier on might have. The heavy oak doors at the back of the courtroom swung open with a decisive thud, cutting off the judge's lecture. All heads turned as a striking woman in her early 60s entered the courtroom. Dressed in an impeccably tailored charcoal suit and carrying a leather briefcase that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent, she moved with the confident grace of someone accustomed to commanding attention. Her silver-streaked dark hair was swept into an elegant chignon, and a single strand of pearls adorned her neck, simple yet unmistakably expensive. Judge Hargrove's smirk vanished, replaced by confusion and then dawning recognition. "Miss Winters, this ice you expected," he said, his tone suddenly deferential. "The Westfield Housing Authority case isn't scheduled until this afternoon." Catherine Winters, CEF Winters Development Group and one of the wealthiest women in the state, approached the bar. Her presence seemed to transform the shabby courtroom. Her authority undeniable even in this setting where the judge supposedly reigned supreme. "I'm not here for that case, Judge Hargrove," she replied, her voice cultured, but with a hint of steel beneath the polish. "I'm here regarding the matter of Elena Jenkins." Elena turned, confusion evident on her face as she looked at the elegant stranger who had somehow known to appear at her hearing. Catherine Winters smiled warmly at Eleanor before addressing the judge again. "Your Honor, I'd like to request permission to address the court regarding this case." Judge Hargrove, visibly flustered by the presence of a woman whose company had recently donated the funds for the county's new judicial center, nodded quickly. "Of course, Ms. Winters, the court would welcome your input." Catherine approached Elena first, speaking softly. "Mrs. Jenkins, I apologize for the intrusion, but when I heard about your case, I felt compelled to come." "May I speak on your behalf?" Elena, bewildered, but with few options, nodded hesitantly. Catherine turned to face the judge, her expression now stern. "Your Honor, I'm disturbed by what I've witnessed in this courtroom today. Mrs. Eleanor Jenkins is not just any defendant. For 15 years, she was the head of housekeeping services at Park View Towers, a building that my company, Winters Development Group, owned until last year when we sold it to Meridian Properties." The judge's expression froze, the implications of this connection clearly dawning on him. During her tenure, Catherine continued, Mrs. Jenkins was known for her exceptional work ethic, her kindness to residents and her integrity. When my late husband suffered his stroke in the penthouse 7 years ago, it was Mrs. Jenkins who found him and called emergency services. The doctor said her quick action saved his life and gave us 3 more precious years together. A murmur ran through the courtroom as story unfolded. Eleanor stood silently, a single tear tracking down her weathered cheek. Furthermore, Catherine added, her voice taking on an edge, Mrs. Jenkins isn't homeless due to poor life choices as you so callously suggested. She and her husband, Robert, lost their home for decades because Robert's cancer treatment exhausted their savings and their insurance coverage. Robert Jenkins, I should add, was a Vietnam veteran who served 2 tours and received a Purple Heart. Judge Harrove's face had drained of color. I was unaware of these details. Clearly, Catherine replied, her tone making the single word sound like an indictment. Perhaps if the court had shown interest in Mrs. Jenkins' circumstances rather than dismissing them as a sob story, these facts would have emerged before judgments were made about her character. The prosecutor, sensing the shifting dynamics in the courtroom, stood quickly. Your Honor, in light of this new information, the city would like to request that the charges against Mrs. Jenkins be dismissed in the interest of justice. Judge Hargrove nodded, eagerly, clearly relieved at the potential escape route. Motion granted. Case dismissed. Mrs. Jenkins, you are free to go. But Catherine Winters wasn't finished. Judge Hargrove, while I appreciate the dismissal, I believe there are broader issues here that need addressing. The judge's relief evaporated. Ms. Winters, the case has been resolved. I'm not sure what other issues. The issue, Your Honor, is that Eleanor Jenkins is just one of hundreds of elderly citizens in this county who have been rendered homeless despite lifetimes of hard work and contribution to our community. The issue is a court system that processes human beings like paperwork without regard for context or compassion. Catherine opened her briefcase and removed a folder. I have here documentation showing that in the past year alone, your court has processed over 200 cases involving homeless elderly defendants with an average fine of $275 money that could have provided temporary shelter, but instead went to court coffers. The courtroom had grown utterly silent, all eyes fixed on the confrontation unfolding before them. Eleanor remained standing, her expression a mixture of confusion and growing hope. Judge Hargrove's face flushed with anger. Ms. Winters, while I respect your position in the community, this court operates according to the law, not emotional appeals or statistical manipulations. Does it? Catherine countered, her voice dangerously soft. Then perhaps you can explain why defendants represented by the public defender's office receive fines averaging 40% higher than those with private counsel. Or why elderly defendants receive harsher sentences than younger ones for identical offenses. My team has been analyzing court records for months, Judge Hargrove. The patterns are troubling. The judge's flush deepened. This is highly inappropriate. If you have concerns about court procedures, there are proper channels. I've tried those channels, Your Honor. My foundation has submitted 3 formal requests for review to the Judicial Ethics Committee. All 3 have been dismissed without investigation. Catherine's gaze was unwavering. So I decided a more direct approach was needed. She gestured toward the back of the courtroom where several people had quietly entered during the exchange. A woman with a press badge, a man in the uniform of the State Judicial Review Board, and another in the suit and bearing of a senior government official. Allow me to introduce Melissa Chin from the Tribune, Commissioner James Wilson from the State Judicial Review Board, and State Attorney General Robert Diaz. They've all taken a particular interest in how our courts treat our most vulnerable citizens. Judge Hargrove's composure crumbled entirely. This is ambush journalism, a setup. I will not have my courtroom turned into a media circus or political theater. No, Your Honor, Catherine replied calmly. This is accountability, something Mrs. Jenkins and countless others like her have been denied. The judge turned to the bailiff. Clear the courtroom. This hearing is adjourned. I believe that would be advisable. Judge Hargrove, said the man from the Judicial Review Board, stepping forward. Closing a public proceeding under these circumstances could be interpreted as obstruction. Eleanor, who had been watching this exchange with growing bewilderment, finally spoke. Please, she said, her voice quiet but clear. I don't want to cause trouble. I just wanted to explain my situation and accept whatever consequences were fair. All eyes turned to the elderly woman whose simple dignity stood in stark contrast to the power dynamic swirling around her. Catherine moved to stand beside Eleanor, placing a gentle hand on her shoulder. Mrs. Jenkins, you haven't caused any trouble. You're simply the face of a problem that has been ignored for too long. Your situation. Losing your home after a lifetime of work because of medical bills, being separated from family due to economic pressures, finding yourself criminalized for simply seeking shelter. This is happening to thousands of elderly Americans. It's not just unfair, it's unconscionable in a society with our resources. The Attorney General stepped forward. Judge Hargrove, I think we should continue this discussion in your chambers. Mrs. Jenkins has been through enough today. The judge, seeing no alternative that wouldn't worsen his position, nodded stiffly. Court is in recess for 1 hour. As the officials moved toward the judge's chambers, Catherine turned to Eleanor. Mrs. Jenkins, would you join us? Your perspective should be part of this conversation. Eleanor hesitated, then nodded, gathering her plastic bag of documents. As they walked toward the chambers, she whispered to Catherine, "Why are you doing this for me? You don't even know." Catherine's expression softened. "But I do know you, Mrs. Jenkins, not just from Park View Towers. You probably don't remember. But 35 years ago you worked as a housekeeper at Westfield General Hospital." Eleanor looked confused. "Yes, before I got the job at Parkview." "But how would you?" "I was a terrified 25-year-old alone in the maternity ward after losing my first baby," Catherine said quietly. "My husband was overseas on business. The nurses were busy. But you sat with me for hours. You held my hand and told me about losing your first child, too, and how you survived it. You brought me tea and an extra blanket, and you treated me with more compassion than anyone else in the hospital." Eleanor's eyes widened with dawning recognition. "The young woman in room 302. I remember you now." Catherine nodded, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "I never forgot your kindness. When I saw your name on the court docket this morning, I have a staff member who monitors cases involving elderly defendants. I knew I had to come. Not just because of what you did for me all those years ago, but because what's happening to you is happening to too many others." As they entered the judge's chambers, Eleanor straightened her shoulders. No longer just a defendant, but now an advocate, her voice about to contribute to a conversation that could change the system that had so callously dismissed her. The meeting in Judge Hargrove's chambers lasted nearly 2 hours. When they emerged, the dynamics had visibly shifted. The judge appeared subdued, the Attorney General satisfied, and Catherine Winters determined. Eleanor walked with a new confidence. Her plastic bag of documents now supplemented with business cards from various officials who had requested her input for upcoming initiatives. When court resumed, Judge Hargrove addressed the room with a markedly different tone than he had used earlier. "In light of today's proceedings and subsequent discussions, I am announcing several immediate changes to how this court will handle cases involving elderly defendants and housing insecurity issues." He outlined a new set of protocols that included mandatory consideration of circumstances, referrals to social services before imposing fines, and a specialized docket for housing cases with dedicated resources for elderly defendants. Additionally, he continued, his voice carrying a hint of genuine contrition. "I will be recommending to the County Board that a portion of court fees be redirected to emergency housing assistance for seniors." Catherine nodded approvingly from her seat beside Eleanor. Finally, the judge concluded, "I owe Mrs. Eleanor Jenkins a public apology. My dismissive treatment of her circumstances was inappropriate and failed to uphold the standard of justice this court should represent. Mrs. Jenkins, I sincerely apologize." Eleanor accepted the apology with a dignified nod, her expression reflecting neither triumph nor resentment, simply the quiet satisfaction of being acknowledged as a person worthy of respect. As the proceedings concluded, the courtroom buzzed with conversation. Reporters huddled in corners, frantically typing on their phones. Legal advocates exchanged business cards, and Eleanor Jenkins found herself surrounded by people eager to speak with her, from social workers offering immediate assistance to community organizers inviting her to share her story. Catherine Winters remained by her side, a protective presence amidst the sudden attention. "Are you all right?" she asked quietly. This is a lot to take in. Elelena nodded, her eyes bright with unshed tears. I came here today expecting to be fined for trying to stay warm. I never imagined. Her voice trailed off, overwhelmed by the turn of events. Mrs. Jenkins, the Attorney General, approached, extending his hand. I want to thank you for your candor in our discussion. Your perspective will be invaluable as we review statewide policies on elder homelessness and court procedures. As the crowd began to disperse, Catherine gently guided Eleanor toward the exit. I have a car waiting, she said. Would you allow me to take you to lunch? We have much to discuss. An hour later, seated in a private dining room at the city's most exclusive restaurant, Elelena stared in wonder at the transformation of her circumstances. That morning, she had counted coins for bus fare. Now she sat across from one of the wealthiest women in the state, discussing solutions to older homelessness over a meal that would have cost her a week's wages from her diner job. I've been thinking about your situation, Catherine said, stirring her tea. And I have a proposition for you. Elelena listened as Catherine outlined her plan. Winter's development group was converting one of their downtown properties into affordable senior housing. They needed someone to serve as resident coordinator, someone who understood the challenges facing elderly residents, particularly those who had experienced housing insecurity. The position comes with an apartment in the building, Catherine explained. And while I can't offer this solely to you without a proper hiring process, I believe your experience makes you uniquely qualified. Would you be interested in applying? Eleanor's hand trembled slightly as she set down her teacup. Ms. Winters. Catherine, please, Catherine, your kindness is overwhelming, but I don't want charity. I've worked all my life and this isn't charity, Elelena. Catherine interrupted gently. This is an employment opportunity for which you are genuinely qualified. The fact that it comes with housing is simply part of the compensation package, and frankly, your perspective would be invaluable to this project. Eleanor considered the offer, her practical nature asserting itself despite her emotional response. I would need to know more about the responsibilities, the hours. My great-grandson, I watch him 3 days a week while my granddaughter works, Catherine smiled. The building will include a child care center for residents' grandchildren. Perhaps you could help us design programs that would accommodate your situation, which I suspect is common among many seniors raising or helping to raise grandchildren. By the end of the meal, Eleanor had agreed to visit the property the following day and discuss the position in more detail. As they parted outside the restaurant, Catherine handed her an envelope. What's this? Elelena asked. A retainer, Catherine replied. If you decide to take the position, we'll need your consulting services during the development phase. This should help with immediate expenses. Elelena opened the envelope and gasped at the check inside, more money than she had seen at once in years. I can't possibly. You can and you will, Catherine said firmly. Your expertise has value, Elelena. It's time the world recognized that. In the weeks that followed, Eleanor's life transformed with dizzying speed. The history of the courtroom confrontation went viral, with headlines highlighting both the treatment of elderly homeless individuals and the dramatic intervention by Catherine Winters. Elelena found herself reluctantly thrust into the spotlight as a symbol of a growing crisis: elderly Americans who had worked all their lives only to find themselves homeless in their final years. She accepted the position with Winter's Development Group and moved into a temporary apartment while the senior housing project was completed. Her granddaughter Jessica and great-grandson Tyler visited often. Their relationship strengthened now that the stress of housing insecurity had been removed. 3 months after that fateful day in court, Elelena stood beside Catherine at the groundbreaking ceremony for Parkview Commons, the new name for the affordable senior housing development. The symbolism wasn't lost on either woman. The building where Elelena had once worked as a housekeeper and later sought shelter would now become a haven for seniors in similar circumstances. We're not just building apartments, Catherine told the assembled crowd, which included city officials, community leaders, and numerous reporters. We're creating a community where our elders can live with dignity, where their wisdom is valued, and where their contributions to society continue. She gestured to Eleanor. Mrs. Jenkins will serve as our resident coordinator, bringing her lifetime of experience and compassion toward his role. Her journey from homelessness to housing advocate exemplifies both the challenges facing too many of our seniors and the resilience they demonstrate daily. Eleanor stepped toward the microphone, nervous but determined. 6 months ago, I was sleeping in my car wondering how a lifetime of hard work had led to such insecurity. Today I stand before you not just as someone who found help, but as someone determined to help others. Her voice strengthened as she continued, "What happened to me is happening to thousands of seniors across this country. Medical bills, fixed incomes that don't keep pace with rising costs, family separations, and a system that often criminalizes poverty rather than addressing its causes. But today, we're taking one step toward a different future." As Eleanor concluded her remarks, Judge Raymond Hargrove approached the podium. His presence caused a stir among the attendees. His participation had not been on the program. "I asked to speak today because I believe in accountability," he began. His usual judicial confidence replaced by humility. "What happened in my courtroom 3 months ago was a failure of justice, not just for Mrs. Jenkins, but for the hundreds of similar cases that passed through without the intervention of someone like Ms. Winters." He paused, visibly uncomfortable, but continuing nonetheless. "Since that day, I've implemented the changes I promised. Every elderly defendant now receives a comprehensive needs assessment before any penalties are considered. Court fees from applicable cases are now directed to a senior emergency housing fund. And I have begun working with the State Judicial College to develop training for judges on addressing elder homelessness with compassion and practical solutions rather than punitive measures." The judge turned to face Eleanor directly. "Mrs. Jenkins, your dignity in the face of my disrespect has taught me more than any legal seminar ever could. Thank you for that lesson." 1 year later, Parkview Commons opened its doors to its first residents, 58 seniors, who had experienced or been at risk of homelessness. The building featured not just affordable apartments, but also a health clinic, community spaces, a childcare center, and job training facilities for residents who wished to continue working. Eleanor's apartment overlooked the courtyard garden where residents grew vegetables and flowers. Her walls displayed family photos alongside news clippings chronicling the journey from that courtroom confrontation to this moment of triumph. A particularly prominent frame contained a photograph of Eleanor and Catherine at the ribbon-cutting ceremony alongside a quote from Eleanor that had been featured in the national coverage. "Dignity isn't a luxury. It's a right that doesn't expire with age." On the anniversary of the court hearing, Catherine visited Eleanor for tea. They sat in Eleanor's sunny living room watching Tyler play with other children in the courtyard below. "Did you ever imagine this outcome when you walked into that courtroom?" Catherine asked. Eleanor shook her head, smiling. "Never. I was just trying to avoid a fine I couldn't pay. And I was just trying to repay a kindness from decades ago," Catherine replied. "Yet here we are, part of something much larger than either of you's intended." Indeed, the ripple effects of that day continued to spread. The state legislature had recently passed the Jenkins Act, establishing new protections for elderly residents facing housing insecurity. 3 other cities had launched similar housing initiatives based on the Parkview Commons model, and Judge Hargrove had become an unlikely advocate for court reform, speaking at judicial conferences about his transformation from by-the-book adjudicator to compassionate justice seeker. "You know," Ellen said thoughtfully, "when the judge laughed at me that day, I felt smaller than I ever had in my life. Invisible, like my decades of hard work and contribution meant nothing." She looked around her apartment at the photographs of her family, at the schedule of resident activities she had organized, at the stack of letters from seniors seeking admission to Parkview Commons. "Now I know that every life has value, every story matters, and sometimes justice arrives in unexpected ways and through unexpected people." Catherine reached across the table to squeeze Eleanor's hand. Sometimes it just takes one person willing to walk through the door at the right moment. Outside, the sun shone on the courtyard where a new community had taken root. A community born from one judge's dismissive laugh, one wealthy woman's moment of recognition, and one grandmother's quiet dignity in the face of injustice.